It's there.
Alright, so this is actually two different tutorials in one, or two different methods rather, of how to talk to NPCs using Gamemaker. And the two different ways are to have the text appear right over the NPC's head, or above the NPC's head, or to have it appear in a GUI or text box in the GUI that stays there. So you have both options. The first option I recommend for platformers, top-down shooters, anything where you don't have a real big GUI. But for things like RTSs or RPGs, where you have a lot of GUI area, it's really better to have a text box, especially RPGs, because you often have lots more text than in other games. So for the first way, you need 3 sprites, or you need 2 sprites. The third sprite is for the second method. If you're going to try the second method, you just might want to try all of this, see what you like better. But you're going to need a character and an NPC sprite, and you're going to need all 3 of those objects. You're going to need your character, it's going to need to be able to move, and then you're going to need your NPC, and you're going to need a write object, which will draw the text. The reason you can't draw the text all with one object, and you need the 2 objects, is because if you try to draw with this object that has a sprite, it will cancel out the sprite and just draw the text. So you can't do both with one object. Otherwise, you could easily do this all with one object. Instead, you're going to need to use 2. So for the first object, I called it NPC underscore text box. This is whatever your generic NPC is, or specific. You can be as specific with the text, or you can make generic ones and then parent them to have different images, whatever you want to do. This is just one of them, and you started off with the create event where you'll need 3 different variables. Line is equal to quote space quote, or quote space in quotes, just to have a blank thing of text, and to identify line as a string or a variable that keeps track of characters, not numbers. Then we have count equals 0. So line is what you're saying, count is which line you're saying. 0 signifies that you're not talking. So that's why we have the next line, speaking equals false. And lastly, we have instance underscore create in parentheses x comma y comma write underscore text box. Now this is the other object that we have to make. The reason why you have it in an instance create thing is that way when you make your NPC, you don't have to then add the right text box with the NPCs everywhere or above them where you'd want to draw the text. Instead, we'll just create it every time you place an NPC. It makes map making a lot easier. Now, in the step event, we're going to have a kind of bit bashing style code where we check if count is equal to 0, then we do this. And then we check if it's 1 or 2 or 3, and for all those we do that. So for if count equals 0, we have speaking equals false because we're not talking, and line is equal to space inside quotes. Now this signifies that we're not talking, and it shows blank text. If count equals 1, we have our first line, so we say line is equal to, then in quotes whatever you want to do. I did line space 1. Then for 2 and 3, you put in your other lines, and you can keep adding lines. You can have as many as you want. I just did 3 because 3 is a common number in games and it shows that it works. So then I have for number 2, line 2, and for count, if count equals 3, line equals line 3. And you always need it in quotes. And last we have our left released, which signifies you're clicking on the NPC, fully clicking on it, and you want to continue talking or start talking. And this is done by if distance underscore to underscore object and then in parentheses char, whatever your character is called, is less than 48. 48 is a number to use if one of your dimensions is 32. Either 32 by 32, 32 by 64, or 64 by 32 all work with the number 48. You want to shrink it or enlarge it depending on your sprite. Especially if you're using 16 by 16, you're going to want to shrink it. And then we have count plus equals 1. And this just raises, it goes to the next line. Before I go farther, I'll explain why you need the distance object. I forgot to go into that. The reason you want to keep that is because that way you can talk to the NPC when you're kind of close to it, but not from halfway across the room. and at the same time you don't have to be right up against him. You don't have to be colliding with him. So back to the other code, count plus equals 1, it goes on to the next line. That's why we have line 1, line 2, line 3. Then speaking equals true. We're now speaking. And then we have if count is greater than 3. You'll remember that I had 3 lines, and I said you could have as many as possible. The reason why you can do that is because you can change this number 3. Let's say you had 8 lines. You can then change that to 8, and it'll go through all of them. And after it goes through all of them, you can then say count equals 0, and then speaking equals false. What this does, it resets the entire speech. It'll show everything blank, and then you have your NPC ready to go again and go through the text again if you need to see it again. And now we have our second object, which is write_textbox. Now there isn't much to this, and before we go any farther, you're going to need to create a font. Now a font can be created by hitting the button up here. It looks like 2 T's. And then I just did default font, and I made it bold, but you can change the font size anything you want, but we're going to need a font. And then you're going to have to set the font, which you can do by under the Draw tab. Drag the font over, it also looks like 2 T's. Set the font to whatever your font is. I'd have font 0. And align it center. This is the important thing. When writing over the head, you want to center it, so that when you have lines of different length, it still looks like it belongs. Then you set the color to whatever color you want. I did green because green shows up against the room color and the text box that I did in the GUI for the other example. Then we just have a couple lines of code. If instance underscore nearest in parentheses x comma y comma NPC underscore textbox in parentheses dot speaking equals true, what this line does is it checks the closest NPC text box to see if it's speaking. You don't want to check all of the NPC text boxes because maybe you're not close enough to talk to them, or maybe they're on some different line than this one. So you only want to check the closest one if it's speaking. And then if it is speaking, you do draw text and then x comma y minus 32. That puts it above the NPC. Instance underscore nearest, this is the same function as above the NPC text box, instance nearest. Dot line. So you draw the text dot line. And this is whatever your line is currently, and it'll draw it right above the NPC's head or sprite or whatever. And you may need to change the y minus 32, but the x stays the same, especially because it's centered, and you're all set. So that is it for the first method. For the second method, you will need 3 objects. An NPC GUI, and then 2 identical objects, write underscore line 1 and write underscore line 2. Now the reason we have 2 of those objects is because we can draw 2 lines, which is why we need 2 variables. So in the create event, you have line 1 equals blank in quotes, or space in quotes rather, so it shows up as just blank text. Line 2 is equal to space in quotes, and then count is equal to 0, and speaking is equal to false. This signifies that nothing is being said, the speech is blank, and we are not speaking. In the step event, we have our bit bashing method of showing the text. If count equals 0, which means we are not talking, speaking is equal to false, so we have a variable to keep track of it. Line 1 is equal to blank in quotes, and line 2 is equal to blank in quotes. Next, we have if we're actually talking. This is our first line of speech, but you actually get 2 lines, and you actually get more characters because it's in a text box. It doesn't look funny. It looks funny if it's really long over a character, but this is in a text box where it's meant to be as part of the GUI, so you get more characters. I find with 128 by 64, with a font size 12, you can get around 20 some odd characters and 2.5 lines. So if you shrink it down to font 10, you get 25 plus characters and 3 lines of text. So that's the best way to maximize it if you won't have a smaller GUI. In larger GUIs like 320 by 128, which is what I'm using, I can use a font size 12 and still get 5 lines. So that works really well. And so now you have if count equals 1, you set line 1 and line 2. You need to set both lines of text and you put in whatever. I just put in this is line 1 and this is line 2. And I did that for if count equals 2, this is line 3, this is line 4. And count equals 3, this is line 5, this is line 6. And the reason why we do those counts is because in the left press, we keep cycling through the counts. So if distance underscore to underscore object in parentheses char is less than 48, we put this code in there so that you can talk to the NPC when you're close to them, but not necessarily colliding. You don't want to be bumping up against the guy just like real life, and you don't want to be halfway across the room, so you have to be semi-close. 48 is the number to use if one of your dimensions on your sprite is 32. You may want to mess with that number. Just change 48 until it looks good for you. Next we have count plus equals 1. This cycles through the different lines, so depending on what count we're on depends what we're saying. So we plus equals 1 when we are close enough and we click on them. And speaking equals true. We're speaking now, it'll draw text in the right objects. Then we have if count is greater than 3. Now, this number is what helps us reset the speech. If you have 8 lines of text, so you need 4 of them with this GUI, you would change that to 4. If you have 12, that would mean you need to do it in 6. You change that to 6. So depending on how many lines you have, depends on when you reset it, when it's greater than something. Then you have count equals 0, because it'll loop back around to 0, and speaking equals false. This shows that we're not speaking anymore, and everything's all set. So that's it for the GUI. Now you need right underscore line 1 and right underscore line 2. Now, in the draw event of these, you set the color, and you set the font. You can just create any font you want. I just left default settings but bolded it. The important thing is that it's aligned left. For text boxes in the GUI, you always want it to align left. And now we have in this draw event piece of code, draw underscore text in parentheses x comma y comma npc underscore GUI dot line 1. You don't need instance underscore nearest code because any NPC talking can talk. So we have this now. We are ready to do line 2, which is the same exact code, except in the code it's draw text with the variable line 2 instead of line 1, and now both of your lines are drawn. And now to finish this up, you're going to need to go in the room and draw your text box by going to tiles and keep the text box drawn in a background, and then you just place it and it'll place the entire text box anywhere so it makes sense in your GUI. And then I had to snap X 16 and snap Y 8 so I could place the draw line 1 and line 2 above each other but spaced out. So they're 8 pixels from the border, and you can see that I could fit 2.5 if I really wanted to. So if I shrunk the font size, it would be even more. Or if I snapped Y to like 4 or something, I could decrease the size of which they were apart, and I could fit more lines. So that's how you do that. And I put in a couple of the text box ones so you can show them, so you can see when they're far apart. You can see when I'm not close to either of them, any of these, it doesn't work. But when I'm close to this guy, I can cycle through all the lines. When I'm close to this guy, it'll cycle through this guy and not that guy. Won't click him. Then I can go down to the GUI and I'll click him, and you have this is line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4, line 5, line 6, and you go through. So just messing with font sizes and text box sizes, even a small text box, like 128 by 32 is still really good, and that can help a lot. That would honestly get you about 30 characters. I kind of underestimated before looking at this again, because this is 128 and that was about 20 characters, and it only did half of the text box. You can pretty much get 40 with a font size 12 if you wanted to do 128 by 32. So you can get a good amount of characters in there, get a good amount of speech in an RTS or something. An RPG, you're going to need a bigger text box. But that is it. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Any requests, feel free to request. Do not forget to subscribe, like, and follow me on Twitter at @FP_games. And once again, thanks for watching.